Thank you for having me. I look forward to this discussion, and the group of us and the executive branch and the legislature working together on these issues. I will make some opening remarks, but those of you interested, I think all of you have a paper hot off the press which underlines the opening comments by Senator Liu, that Common Core meets state policy. This changes almost everything. So you're going to have detailed people here on assessment later, and I'm going to give you more of an overview, and we can discuss some of these phase-in issues that the chair referred to. So as was indicated, the Common Core, as you know, is been adopted by 45 states and the District of Columbia. The Obama administration has given about $380 million to two assessment consortium to build new assessments. That's a huge amount of money to build assessments. The head of Smarter Balanced Assessment that we're part of with more than 20 other states is here today. And so far, the general political attacks on the Common Core, largely from right-of-center groups, have been ineffective in slowing it down or reversing the movement. So we're on a path to do this. I don't sense a lot of opposition at all in California to doing it. The challenges which were outlined earlier are there, but the general idea seems to have high acceptance. So the keys for Common Core standards were fewer of them. Our mathematics curriculum has been criticized as a mile wide and an inch deep, and so the idea of getting fewer was there. Higher. Our prior standards effort, for example, was not linked to post-secondary education, and I don't mean just four-year college. We're talking about all forms of post-secondary education. This one, we have extensive involvement, and essentially we're able to look at what post-secondary education wanted students to know and be able to do and derive the standards in part from that. And deeper, I think, is another important challenge, which I think you're aware of through reading increasingly complex tasks and nonfiction reading and mathematics problem solving. One of the things I have in the paper, which is on, let's see, page 2 here, is a number of descriptors of what will be in the Common Core standards. It's in the middle. Students will be able to understand, describe, explain, justify, prove, derive, assess, illustrate, analyze, going on, model, construct, compare, investigate, summarize, evaluate. Those are some of them. These are very different qualities than you can, for example, measure in a closed-end multiple choice test, which in our setting is providing, roughly 90% of our current assessment. So if you take these areas as and this overview as to what we need, what are the implications for all of policy? And so that's where I get back to this changes almost everything. And for the audience, the paper is in the back as well for those of you that would want to see it. So if you look at the chart on the first page here, I'll run through some of these things, and then I'll talk a little bit about our machinery, which is on another page. So if you look at that oval there, as the chair indicated, at the center are these new standards. The science standards will be before the board probably this fall for approval. So once you get new standards, everything else around it, these are my key words, must be aligned and coherent, and you can't have gaps, and you need a lot of depth, the depth of, for example, implementation through professional development. So what are we working on as we look at this and together? We've been working more on our content. For example, the states can fill in 15% in addition to the Common Core, so we've made changes there. We have instigated through the legislature and its authority, a new materials process. The old 7-year cycle of adopting textbooks is now history. That's your father's Oldsmobile. And what we're looking at is a much quick-hitting process that will involve the state endorsing materials that locals may adopt. Locals may also go through their local adoption process for materials if they so choose to apply to all the state requirements. We think they'll look carefully at our endorsements. There are 45 other states and D.C. in this. We can look at materials from other states. It is really, California has been on its own all the years I've been here, since 1969, doing these materials. We can take stuff from New York if we like that. And we can also have local nominations bottom up for materials they want to use. Digital materials will also be there, and they're being developed. And so we really scan the country to look at what's going on rather than going through the slower process here of developing everything. The second area, principal and teacher policy. Obviously, the preparation of teachers must change to meet these kinds of different standards that I indicated. Currently, they are really oriented more to our older standards. The huge effort of professional development, I think we'll be discussing that, and the state superintendent's here and can also talk about the progress there that we're making. But we have over 300,000 teachers, a new curriculum. Some of them have been teaching from scripts in a more narrow way. There's been a lot of focus on multiple choice testing. That's out the window, as I'll indicate, as the major primary thing. Teacher evaluation. This discussion has been very intense. If you take the kinds of words that I talked about, where your curriculum features understanding, justifying, deriving, modeling, investigating, and all that sort of thing, you'll have very different assessments. That means how you evaluate teachers will need to be different. So a lot of the discussion, I find, is referring back on teacher evaluation to the old California standards tests, and we're looking forward to these new things. We're going to have some performance exams where students look at an issue like nuclear power and its pros and cons and write up some analysis. Well, that's very different than looking at the API score on a multiple choice test. So teacher evaluation will have to change. The state assessments is the major focus of your discussion, but they obviously will change. But if you look at this, here's what we're facing with you. If you take the four subjects, English language arts, math, history, social studies, and science, Smart or Balanced will deliver assessments only in two of those four content areas, English language arts and mathematics. It will deliver assessments to us in only the NCLB grades 3 through 8 and grade 11. That means we have holes in our current system in grades 2, in grades 9 and 10. If we want to have 12, that's also an issue. And we have no assessments underway, new assessments at this point in science and history social studies because the standards have not been adopted or changed in those areas. So we've got, a lot of need, and that'll be talked about by the experts here. The Smarter Balanced will help us develop those 9th and 10th grade tests, but we hope to use the savings from suspension of tests to develop the important holes we have, for example, in 9th and 10th grade and in some of the end of courses like Algebra 2. Special education on the left, that has to change, and those students need much different expectations than we've had before. So the California Modified Assessment, known as CMA, that will need to be changed. CAPA, C-A-P-A, for students with these extreme special needs, that will need to change. The finance reform proposed by the governor is an essential part of this. As we see it, how can you implement and make these changes at the local level when we have 52 or so categorical programs that are in the middle of this? So the flexibility issue is not just generic flexibility, but the ability of the districts to move their money to meet this challenge. So I don't think, I know that the current finance formula with its many categorical programs and attendant regulations was not designed to make a quick-hitting shift like this. So you need to look at finance as part of this, important part of this component. English learners, 25% of our students. We had English learner standards that were really a mixture of standards and how to do it. We have totally approved new English learner standards that integrate that into the Common Core. So the state has done, I think, a quick job of reorganizing the English learner standards, rethinking how they would tie into the high language complexity of the Common Core compared to what we had before. And we seem to have, support of the community that is supporting these students outside for what we've been doing. It's been really harmonious. Career and technical education. This is under development. One of the assessment groups called PARC, they're the other one we're not in, they seem to say college and career readiness are the same thing. We don't agree with that. We're looking at how to split assessment so that we assess more the skills of career technical education. And we're looking at specific occupations like heating and air conditioning, looking at what students need to know when they enter a program of that sort, not when they finish, but when they go from high school to that kind of a program. So that area is important. Waivers flexibility. The board will have to respond with more waivers. College readiness. We have 3 members from our higher education institutions participating in Smarter Balanced in our assessments. And so there we will also ask them to use the process they use for the early assessment program, where they will recognize our grade 11 summative assessment as a valid measure of college content readiness, just content readiness, and they will use the grade 11 assessment as evidence that students are ready for credit-bearing coursework and can be exempted from remediation. Unlike last time, the 1995 era, we did not involve post-secondary education in a deep enough way. This time, we have had a meeting 2 weeks ago in Sacramento with the Faculty Senate representatives, Faculty Union representatives, the instructional leaders at the administrative level of the 3 systems, have talked with the non-private systems as well. The assessment will be adaptive. It'll be called computer adaptive. If you get in there and you're doing well, it'll shift you up to harder items. If you're not doing so well, it'll adapt you down. So the so-called adaptive engine of this assessment system will be a very important item for us to look at in the future. 2 other areas I'd mention is we need better articulation and curriculum and content and teaching between preschool, traditional kindergarten, transitional kindergarten, I should say, and grade 3. And the assessment people will be providing items for that, but not building a test. We will have to decide what to do in grade 2, which we currently assess. And the other is we spend $700 million in after-school programs in California, and we'll have to also harness those into this effort. So you can see how I get to it. Changes almost everything. I could go on for another 10 minutes, but I'll stop. If you look at page 4 of your of what I've written here, and I'm not going to go through this, you will see a diagram of the machinery for changing our standards, which go through the legislatively created Instructional Quality Commission, chaired by former State Superintendent Bill Honig. And you'll see some of our timelines there. I'm sure you've noticed that some of the timelines come right up against the assessment in 214, 215. We have made a report, and the superintendent's here is his report, I should say, on assessment on the left-hand side, so we're working that through. And then finally, accountability under the new legislation that requires 40% of high school assessment accountability to not be assessment based. So let me close by giving you my plea. My plea would be, we desperately need, I believe, that teachers get the right signals and get them as soon as possible. Therefore, I support fully that we give the assessment in the year 2015, in spring of 2015. I think, teachers, an assessment focuses them on what they need to know and be able to do. I think a deeper discussion and somewhat different discussion is how you phase in accountability. I strongly support giving the assessment that year. I noticed I was in Dallas, Texas. Texas is not a member of the Common Core. The great Lone Star State goes its own direction. They had, I would think, in my view, a weaker version of the Common Core. They are already implementing it, and they declared down there a one-year moratorium on accountability. And so the first year, to me, would be a baseline, and perhaps it's not something you would want to hold people accountable for, but then future you would look for growth, and I think you'd see growth rather rapidly as people get used to it. So I think we can phase this in, but we're speaking for the State Board of Education only. We're open to thinking about this with you and trying to work it out, and I think the chair's opening statements were on target about some of the issues. So that's my overview of changing almost everything. So for you as policymakers, I guess my final comment would be, this is not just about an assessment. You've got all these moving parts, and it's not just about materials and professional development. You've got all these other moving parts that are out there as well, and these moving parts, to close, they have to be aligned together so they're not conflicting with each other. We need to fill in the gaps, that are there. Right now, the finance is, in my view, a gap. And we need to keep the whole process coherent. So, and to give us a positive update and ending, we did this before. If you go back to 1995, and the current standards we have, the current accountability system we have, the current professional development system we have. In 1995, everybody was doing his or her own thing. There was no state overall framework of content and standards to guide the system. There was no assessment that had a significant impact. We have done it once. We made the parts coherent. We dealt with the moving parts. The materials the boards adopted were aligned to the assessments. So I believe we can do this again, but we're trying it with a higher raising of the bar in terms of student standards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So what happens if some school districts are just not prepared? That's the first question. Are they going to be lumped into this waiver of flexibility? Are you granting waivers to certain districts?
We haven't really seen any waivers at this point. I'm sure there might be circumstances where districts would come in with a waiver request of some sort. So all I can say is I can't anticipate what those would be, but we would certainly hear them, and this state board has been very flexible in approving waivers, and we certainly would sympathize and try and understand their needs. We have an afternoon of waivers tomorrow afternoon on our board agenda, so a lot of those would be around issues that may be less prominent than they have been in the past, like QEIA or something like that. So that would be part of it. Districts will differ. Obviously, with 1,043 districts, we are going to have an uneven implementation. That happened before. They got more and more cues from the assessment on what the state was looking for. And districts that are not implementing won't look so good on the assessment and won't look so good on indicators of implementation. They may not have the right materials. So I'm sure there will be a way to gather information on this, and those that are having problems will hopefully be able to assist. We have a large partnership with county offices of education. We're relying heavily on the county offices as one area to help. So we would be able to pinpoint these districts and offer some assistance and advice.
You know, when the state went through this, as you indicated before, in the 1990s, there was money to go along with the a new implementation of a new system, so to speak. And I understand that money, even though it's going to Smarter Balance, is not really here to help our schools bring in new technology or professional development or those kinds of things. So I am a little apprehensive about how this is all going to get rolled out. I think what you're hearing from the public or not hearing from the public is good. I mean, you're not hearing it from us in terms of oh no, why are we part of this Common Core, experiment, et cetera. But we're concerned about how it's all going to roll out and how efficient it's going to become for our kids. So,
let me address that in terms of the money. I mean, at this point, the approach is that the finance reform proposed by the governor, which will free up considerable amounts of money, would be reallocated from the numerous categorical programs and things that they've been working on immediately into more professional development and areas of that sort. So if you've got your money tied up by the state government in so many pots that have to be there and have to be audited and all that sort of thing, I don't see how they could do it if we don't change the finance system. Otherwise, you could not change. Your option would be to not change the finance system and then say, well, we need a lot more money to do this. So our hope is that the legislature will make the finance system flexible so that they can shift their money to instruction and instruction for all pupils, so money is targeted to particular categorical groups, and you have to hire special personnel that service those programs and teach in those programs, use teacher aides and so on that may not be effective. So that's what we're seeing, and as you know, the governor's proposal has quite a bit of increase over its 5 to 7 year life, and so as the implementation comes closer and the consequences of not implementing become clearer to the districts, they will have more flow of money. So the idea that we just have to pile another categorical for Common Core implementation on top of the categoricals that go back to the 60s, that I think has been what we would have done maybe in the past, but that's why the finance proposal is part of it. We need to change almost everything.
Okay, thank you. Questions from members? Mr. Correa, Senator Correa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, I wanted just to restate the chair's question in a different manner, which is, because of the severe economic downturn, a lot of the schools have suffered when it comes to their budgets. So we eliminate the categoricals, but given all the cuts that schools have sustained, again, where do we get the resources to implement this? Special ed, athletics, for example, that are so critical in keeping a lot of our kids off the streets, or after-school programs, so to speak, including athletics that have suffered so much. Yet we're going to try to have this transformation. Yet if you eliminate the categoricals, you still have a situation where schools have been devastated by all these recent cuts. So again, where do you get the money to implement these?
Well, if you look at the governor's finance proposal, there's rather for the districts, particularly with high special needs, there's quite a bit of stair-step money going up. So so that's why the finance increases. How you, as a legislature, decide to distribute those. I know the legislature's talking about the needs of different districts, and I think that's a good place to think about this issue. And so at this point, if we're, districts, some districts will be going from 8,000 to over 11,000 within that period. So we're on a path back. And so this is actually well poised to undertake funding from those sources. Now, to make your point, though, reinforce your point, this money, not much came this year, and this is 2012-2013 year, and so it ramps up in the later years. So the actual phase-in of consequences for districts, I think, is the issue we need to put on the table. Where does the accountability come in? We need to rethink accountability, but where does it come in the process? So you would give the assessment in 2015, but the accountability could be phased in my view, as the resources and preparation took place. So I'm trying to detach from the implementation of actually giving the assessment and continuing all our professional development and giving a signal that the legislature wants this to be done as quickly as possible. I'm kind of detach that signal from how you phase in the accountability part, which I think is more wide open. A wild card in that is what our friends at the federal government are going to do. But they have supported this very strongly, the Obama administration, and there's 45 states, so and a lot of them are in our condition. We're not the only one with cutbacks in the recession. So I think we need to detach, say we're moving forward with these policies, think about phasing of other policies. So it's, again, my theme that you have a lot of interlocking policies to consider, and you need then to parcel them out and think about them in terms of how to send clear, strong signals that we want the Common Core, and we want to show you what the assessments are, because a lot of teachers really won't get it till they see the assessments. We do have a large number of school districts and teachers participating in our pilot study this year and our other pilots next year. So they're already, I think, getting clues. But it's a problem, and it really relates around phase-in. We're going to have a group with the State Department of Education and the State Board to look at this phase-in and more carefully. And I'm sure we'll have more to talk with you last night. We actually, a number of us met with the governor last night around this very issue, and for quite a number of hours. So. It's not all the phase-in pieces are in place.
Excuse me, Senator Hancock, and then Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really very happy to hear a lot of what you're saying, Dr. Kirst. It has seemed to me for a very long time that we were measuring apples and oranges when every state developed its own standards, its own tests, and we couldn't really tell how we were doing as a country. I'm glad that we're developing new assessments. I hope you'll be able to report back on the results of some of the pilots that are happening, because we know we need better assessments. I'm very concerned, and I'm also glad to hear you talking about maybe a new way of looking at accountability. My experience with it is it seemed to be playing a game of gotcha with a lot of schools trying as hard as they possibly can with inadequate resources to educate our kids to very, very high standards. If we look at it as doing this together and learning together about what we need to know and be able to do so that our kids can achieve to the standards we've set, and then being willing to fund it. And I'm very concerned about that as well, that we're going to need to be looking at what it really takes to do this kind of education and be prepared to step up as a state and do that. But my concern is with the eliminating categoricals. I have come to believe very strongly that what we're calling career technical education or linked learning or career exploration in the context of learning is extremely important for keeping many of our kids in school. It's also a fairly new way of looking at education, and it takes resources. I would not want the Common Core to push out this new model that districts are developing, which shows such promise. Now, how are we going to deal with this kind of education?
Yes, well, as I indicated before, one of the diagram on the front of my paper, we have career technical education in there. Career technical education embodies lots of the things in the Common Core. Application of knowledge, evaluating results, applying knowledge you learn in general into a concrete setting. Career technical education, it fits in with the idea of performance assessments. Because often you have to do something. So, the popular analogy is there's a difference between the driver's exam to get a driver's license and getting behind the wheel. And so we really aspire in the Common Core to not only measure your knowledge of the driver's test, but to measure how well you actually drive, park the car, and so on. So career technical education is really compatible with this. And I think that that area is something we really want to work on. We also are very interested, and I think you might ask Mr. Wilhoft, who's the head of Smarter Balanced, who's in this audience, what his thoughts on how to assess career technical education and how it's different from how you would assess other forms of education. So that I think is something we're aware of and committed to in this setting. But I think that's very important, and I think the Finance Department has indicated that they're looking at the regional occupation program issue and the fact that it has a lot of joint powers, and the formula may not have accounted for that. I was the president of the State Board of Education in 1977 to 1981, and on the board from 1975 on, and we approved most of the regional occupation programs and regional occupation centers, and I remember going all around the state and looking at setting those up, and we actually had to approve them one by one. So I know how they operate, and I think they're another model in addition to linked learning of how to do this. What the comprehensive high schools can do on their own in career technical education, I think is limited given the future and the kinds of equipment that you'll have to work with and the kinds of teachers. So I think that's an area that we will be coming back to you with more details.
Senator Jackson.
Well, first, I want to thank you for acknowledging you've been in this business since the 1970s.
1960s, actually.
60s, well.
2014 will be my 50th year in this business. I started in the federal government in the Bureau of the Budget in 1964.
Well, I certainly appreciate your the depth and breadth of your expertise, and my question really goes to the fact that we have so many different groups here. We've got the Board of Education, we've got the Superintendent of Education, we've got local groups. It's quite an interesting combination of sometimes disparate but certainly diverse groups involved. And I'm wondering what involvement you have or foresee working with our teachers in creating the assessments and creating the accountability. We just had a very interesting hearing with some young people, our high school students. Very impressive group of young people, very thoughtful, in the midst of their own educational experience, who probably have some very helpful ideas as many of us older folks, I don't necessarily go back 50 years, but it's closer than the current group of young people who is here, that young people today oftentimes have a much better idea of what's available to them than we do. And I'm just wondering how much work you have done in this process with our students and our teachers as very much part and parcel of determining these assessments and accountabilities, and what your plan is to have them involved in the future.
Yes, I think I will defer a detailed answer of that to your next witnesses, and I'm sure they'll address it in their own opening remarks. Joe Wilhoft of the Smarter Balanced Consortium, he's the head of it, and Deb Sigmund. I know that teachers have been involved and look and review these items, and I don't know about the student involvement in the formation of the items, but both students and teachers are reacting to a large-scale pilot test of questions that is taking place in over 1,000 schools in the state. So I would say that the major feedback that I would be aware of is less in the design of the items, but more in the fact that these items are out there now, and teachers are looking at them and helping to score them, and the students are taking the exams and trying out the new items, and it's a work in progress. Some of these items aren't well designed, actually, and this is why you do it. It's sort of like the test pilots. So the students are really giving us crucial feedback on how they react to this, and how their verbal views are being incorporated. I think I'll leave to my successors. But we have 2 years of tryouts of the assessments and all of that sort of thing. In addition to the test items, when you do an assessment on a computer adaptive way that shifts you up and down, you have unknown things about students and how they're going to react to that format. I mean, they've got to take things and drag and put them there. Some students haven't ever done that. So we're also really looking very carefully at how students adapt to the adaptive testing. The other testing group called PARC, they don't have a computer adaptive testing. I think computer adaptive testing is the wave of the future. They merely give the assessment on a computer, the way you take the graduate record exam now. So we're actually in the most avant-garde, if you will, of the assessment changes, making your question an even deeper one. And we need to really pay attention carefully to what we're seeing out there. Again, I like that it's in so many other states. So, it'd be interesting to compare what we're doing to Idaho or something like that has a very different kind of population than we do, and what the particular challenges are here. And so they're all taking this in over 20 states now.
I guess what I would like to end with is a strong suggestion, that during the process, as part of the process, you bring to the table particularly teachers or representatives of it, and people who are in the trenches, and students, so that they have a say not just in reacting to what is put to them, but also a say in how the testing evolves. I think that's been part of the problem we've had over the years, is that those who do the work are not necessarily included in determining how that work should be done, and I think that has created problems in our ability to maximize their talents and the input necessary to make the system work better. So I would just, if it isn't being done, I would urge that there be a seat at the table for the teachers, a seat at the table for students. I won't say necessarily how you weight that, because that really is those are not decisions that I think we should be making here. We'll look at the ultimate result, I suspect, but making sure that the relevant and the involved people are definitely participating in the decision making. That's just what I hope we'll see.
I think that's essential, and as my successors will stress, and this really enables me to make another point. We've talked here strictly about what is called in the business summative assessment at the end. The design of the new assessments provide for teachers a huge number of resources over time that will be provided to them, which have nothing, which are not part of the summative assessment. So these are resources that will be provided to them by Smarter Balance through federal money to help the teachers diagnose student learning problems, reteach problems, do interim assessments and what's called formative assessments, so give them the students some brief things. So this assessment design, unlike the one before, has the idea in mind that it's not just all at the end, that you have to provide teachers with a rich array of various tools that they need to improve teaching and learning. So that is a fundamental shift and another piece of making this more coherent and comprehensive than what we did in the past one. And so I think that's, I'm sure that Mr. Willoft and Deb Sigmund will talk about that, but I couldn't agree more. I mean, as you probably are indicating, that lots of teachers are not enthralled with our current assessment system, and so we do have stronger support for this direction we're going from the teachers and their organizations, because they think this is generally more in line with how they were prepared and more in line with how they see themselves as professionals. But I think that's I will certainly keep that in mind and follow up on finding out a little bit more detail about your question and listening to the subsequent testimony.
Thank you. Senator Block?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Kirst, you mentioned that we went through a similar period of transitions in the mid-'90s. Mm-hmm. Were we successful then, and by what measure? What can we learn from what happened, good and bad, in the mid-'90s in terms of moving now into this period?
Well, if you look at the assessment, the California standards test, it's a roaring success. Roughly, we've moved, if the distribution was like this when we began the California standards movement, it's moved roughly like this, what measurement people call a standard deviation, maybe 30 points or so on a 100 scale. So we have really moved the needle. There were so many schools that were below 600, 500 on the academic performance index. So it's fairly rare to find any schools in that level. The bottom deciles, 2 deciles, are now approaching 700 when they used to be at 500. So it's this shows you that the system can respond. It takes some time to respond, but I would say that is the success story. What's the weakness story? We are still so low on the National Assessment of Educational Progress. We're 45, 46. So how do you have this movement on your state assessment and then a low and persisting score on the National Assessment of Educational Progress? One of the major factors in it, and I don't know how much, but it's clearly, is that the national assessment is assessing things like in the Common Core and more similar to what Smarter Balanced is delivering. Therefore, I believe that if you move your new system to something that's better aligned with the national assessment, you will see increases there. So the multiple choice assessment and whatever we were doing was not relying not with national assessment. National assessment has not just closed-end multiple choice tests. They have open response. You have to respond to something. They have much more analysis and application. So we were doing better on the, memorizing content and plugging in the rules to solve particular mathematical problems using the rules the students memorized. But when it's this transfer of knowledge, you have to take it from here. Okay, there's no rule. Apply it here. Well, the kids say, "What's the rules for that?" Well, at some point you don't have all these rules, and you get bogged down. Frankly, I've forgotten a number of those rules over the years as well. And so that I think is where we will go. The third assessment used is called PISA, P-I-S-A. That's used by the Organization for Economic and Cooperative Development, OECD in Paris, and is in more of the industrialized countries. And their assessments are really much closer to the Common Core than what we've been doing, and therefore the curriculum. Let me say that another lesson I take from this, Jim Popham, a professor emeritus at UCLA, coined years ago the concept of measurement-driven instruction. No matter what we say about tests, I believe that the CST experience of over a decade shows that teachers in the system will respond to the assessment and the testing that they are being subjected to in terms of accountability. So, in my view, there's nothing wrong with teaching to a good test. There are some things wrong with teaching to a not-so-good test. So that's a long answer, but it's a success on one hand and not so successful on the other.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? Well, we appreciate your being here. I have a final comment. Two things. We'd like to hear about the progress of the testing in the field periodically prior to, quote, implementation in 14-15. But Common Core, the idea of Common Core has generally come through the legislature in terms of a policy discussion, but not the weighted student formula or the local control funding. And, we'd like to see, we would really like to see how this, because that's an important fit into what is coming. And your way of articulating the need for funding in order to make this Common Core successful just brings to the point that we need to see this whole picture also, because it is a stark, what has been proposed in the local control funding is a stark, very different from how schools currently function, and many of them are very upset with the, quote, the schedule that has come out. So we need to have a broader discussion here, and would appreciate maybe a bill that comes forward, or something more solid that we can address rather than just going through the budget.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. Well, I will certainly carry that back. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Sure.